Hello, and welcome to Uncovering Cover Art. I'm Rashida Smith, the online program coordinator for Clarion West. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Clarion West is based in the traditional, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish people, past and present. Tonight's event is part of our annual Write-a-thon, 6 weeks of free programming to support, encourage, and inspire writers around the globe to create wild and amazing worlds. Registration is free, participation is free, and there are no minimums for writing or fundraising. With 3 more weeks left of programs, workshops, and community writing sessions, we'd love for you to register and join us at the link we're dropping in the comments section. You can also follow that link to sponsor a participating writer or make a donation. Your fundraising supports programs like tonight's cover art panel, as well as ABA accessible events, world-class paid instructors and guests, and scholarships for emerging and underrepresented writers. And be sure to join us on July 19th for the penultimate panel in our series, Mental Health and Writing at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Covers sell books, and they also tell stories all of their own. Tonight's guests are artists, designers, illustrators, and publishers who are here to share their insights into the cover design process. First up, Amy Fleck is a designer, illustrator, and publisher living in Brooklyn, New York. They currently work as a senior designer at Zeitgeist, an imprint of Penguin Random House, and their clients have included Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, Boom Comics, Restless Books, and Workman Publishing Company. They also run their own publishing company, Bad Influences Press, a small press specializing in fandom publishing. When they're not working, and sometimes when they are, they enjoy science fiction, 80s music, fashion, and fan fiction. Amy, I understand you're partial to fan fiction, so what are some of your favorite fandoms?
Oh, wow. Cool. Right out of the gate, huh? Yeah, so I'm currently super into a bunch of Chinese web novels, which have been adapted, some of them into Netflix, well, not Netflix shows, but television shows that you can see on Netflix. And I suspect if you poke around publishing, you will find some other people who are interested in these. I think the most popular one is The Untamed. So that, yes.
Thanks. Our next guest is as a narrative designer at Wizards of the Coast. Grace P. Fong generates concepts that become card art for Magic: The Gathering. As a freelance illustrator, Spec Fic magazine covers are her specialty, as well as promotional work for authors. In 2020, she won the inaugural Ignite Award for Best Artist. She has also been to Antarctica and knelt in penguin poo. Grace, do you have a favorite magazine cover you've illustrated?
That's hard to say. I think like the latest one that I did for Strange Horizons for Towers of Ivory, Towers of Horn came out earlier this year in June. That's probably my favorite lately. It was a chance for me to be much more experimental, which is why I love working with the Spec Fic magazines.
Thank you. Next up, as the professor of media and cultural studies at the University of California at Riverside, John Jennings's work is centered on intersectional narratives regarding identity politics and the popular media. He is a co-editor of the Eisner Award-winning collection and a co-founder and organizer of comic festivals in Harlem, San Francisco, and at Ohio State University. John, you've adapted 2 of Octavia Butler's most well-known works, Parable of the Sower and Kindred, as graphic novels. Did the process of adaptation give you new insight into either of those works?
I think it's hard not to. I mean, because basically the adaptation process is really kind of getting into the meat of the story. You basically have to read it like multiple times and then really try to unravel just how complex Octavia Butler's work is, even with the terseness of her prose. I mean, it's really a really wonderful experience, but also it's maddening because of the pressure. It's such a treasure to people, and so it was. I think that was actually probably the most daunting thing. It's just the amount of pressure. But yeah, I think that's it. I mean, yes, I would say that really understanding how well she researched things. She almost became like a expert in everything that she researched. If you ever seen her papers, I mean, it was exhaustive research just to write the pieces that she was doing. So that would be my probably too verbose answer to that question. So
We can't imagine anybody better to take on the work. So thank you. And last but not least, Sloan Leong is a cartoonist, artist, and writer of Hawaiian, Chinese, Mexican, Native American, and European ancestries. She's written and drawn 2 acclaimed graphic novels, A Map to the Sun and Prism Stalker, and her writing has appeared in Fireside Magazine, Dark Matter Magazine, and Entropy Magazine. She is currently living on Chinook land near what's now known as Portland, Oregon. Sloan once went hiking with the Pride of Lions. So Sloan, tell us, what was the most surprising thing about that hike, besides the lions?
Besides the lions, they were extremely well behaved, and that was probably because they were cubs rescued from basically the wild. Their parents had been hunted, and so they were at a super huge, just like it's like 50 acres of like a conservatory for wild animals and in Zimbabwe, and it was super cool. They're very naughty, but they listened very well to the handlers.
That sounds like a once in a lifetime experience. So off of the fun stuff and onto the more fun stuff, which is our talk about covers. So just to start out, can you talk a little bit for all of us about the expectations of genre and how they shape designs on the various cover projects that you worked on? Amy, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that is super interesting because when I got into publishing, I kind of got thrown into YA middle grade sort of cold because I had worked on my own things, which were, of course, just, you know, whatever I thought looked good. And I think going into YA in middle grade, it was both astonishing and also like kind of at times frustrating, like how much genre does affect what you're expected to see in a cover. But I think the other thing, like the flip side of that is that because there are genre conventions and such a big part of cover design is making sure your audience can identify what kind of book it is from just looking at it and being attracted to that book kind of on a shelf to automatically identify like, oh, like I like this kind of book. It looks sort of like other books, while still doing something completely different and new and iconic, is the sort of challenge that I think oftentimes you get really good covers out of it because you have people kind of pushing, working within parameters and pushing known limits, but also trying to create something entirely new. So.
Thanks, Bryce. How about you? You were working in magazines. Is that different versus genre and also working freelance?
Yeah, so one of the differences with magazines is usually they have a genre already and a steady following. So you're actually selling, you're making a cover for an established audience. Whereas if you were working for, say, like an art director at a publishing house, they have a much wider spread and the way that they advertise to their market is different. Like things will be placed in bookstores with an audience that isn't necessarily very tuned into like, the happenings of like what's going on every day within the community, which is different from like a lot of short fiction magazine audiences. So you have to trust that your client understands who their audience is because essentially as an illustrator, you are a master of the art of communication. So you try to find visual representations that help match the expectations of said audience, be it the colors, the shapes, like where things are even laid out on the book page as well.
Thank you. So John and Sloan, you work in graphic novels. So maybe Sloan, can you start and then John wrap us up on your take on genre and novels and covers?
Sure.
Yeah, I think graphic novel covers, I mean, I have worked in science fiction, but in the monthly form, which requires a cover for each issue. And you kind of have to, I don't know, what my experience is, you have to have a more consistent, look. You're not allowed to experiment as much because like Amy and Grace was saying, you kind of want to flag your genre. And because you're literally, you're like on a huge, shelf with all these other comics that are also working in the same, not just in the same genre, but with similar tropes. Like not just superheroes, but also like, I don't know, a lot of like crossover between genres. It can get a little dicey trying to stand out. So establishing like a very clear cover brand is really important. Yeah.
Okay. So I can start, I guess. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I've done a lot of design for educational spaces too, so I've done like a lot of work independently. I was an independent publisher, on the side for a while, and also a curator. And so I've done like a lot of publication design from various standpoints. And, I've never worked on a monthly book, like say for Marvel, DC, or anything like that, or Boom, or what have you. But I now run an imprint for Abrams Comic Arts called Megascope. And so I'm looking at a lot of covers, helping design a lot of covers. And so each one is different, and each one is speaking directly to a particular, like, is it catching the essence of the story that's being told, and it's Sloan is saying that, but, actually everyone, it's, you have to be able to catch the eye. I mean, they're like little posters to a certain degree. And I guess the theme is, if someone can pick up your book, if you can get someone to pick the book up, then maybe they might purchase it, that kind of thing, right? The other thing that's been kind of like off-putting a little bit is because I'm used to having more control over the design of the cover, just because of my background in independent publishing and education, is that the power that public relations and sales have over what the cover looks like was really, really shocking to me at first. I was like, oh, and like sales, like, nope, can't sell it. And I was like, oh, wait, what? But this is beautiful. Look at the teal. No, they're like, nope, can't do it. And so, yeah, so that was really interesting. Particularly like this book we did After the Rain. There was a lot of pushback on different things we wanted to do. So that was really interesting to me as far as like what sales is thinking will sell to an audience, right? To a particular audience. We do primarily speculative fiction. So we're, again, picking up those visual tropes and stuff, that people were talking about on the panel. But yeah, I think that's it. Stop talking.
That's wonderful. And I saw so many of the other panelists nodding along. So it seems like others have had experience with sales and marketing or promo having input into the final design. So Grace, do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, so basically a lot of, in my experience, what happens with sales in marketing is they do a lot of market research, which is stuff that obviously as illustrators, you wouldn't even have time or resources to do. So they'll often like analyze things within a similar sphere, like other products within the same sphere, similar to comp titling your query letter, to figure out and kind of distill like what has been a good signifier to this audience before. For example, like there was a really large trend within YA of using photographic covers of female protagonists in really like silk ball gowns, right? So that was basically a signal to that audience that if you enjoyed a previous book within this, that had all these topics, then you'll probably like this book as well, because it has a lot of similar elements.
That seems like it's something you see. Romance is particularly well coded in their covers, and I've seen some kerfuffle about, well, the covers are changing, so people don't know how to read for them. Amy, in your experience, also, you're working especially with large houses like Penguin, and I'd imagine at Macmillan, there's a lot of marketing and promo influence into cover. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and even specifically YA and some of your nonfiction work as well, if you could?
Yeah. So like what John and Grace are saying is completely correct. Sales has a big input into what covers look like, and they also have a lot of research that even the designers and the editors don't necessarily have the time or the resources to do. But the flip side to that is oftentimes sales doesn't necessarily have like a visual background. So you're kind of constantly having this push and pull of like, as an artist, as somebody who's read the book, who's talked to the editor, who's working with an illustrator, you're super passionate about what you did and what you're doing. And sometimes you end up in the position often of having to sell your idea, not only to the editor first and your art director and the publisher, but also to sales. Often by the time you get to sales, you're also at a final cover. One of the books that I worked on at Macmillan, Wilder, this is my like notorious anecdote about this, is that I did about 25 to 30 comp covers, and then brought it to we narrowed it down, brought it to the publisher, we got a final cover, we brought it to sales, and they were just like, no. So we ended up going back, and I think I probably did somewhere between like 75 and 100, like not finished, but cover concepts for this book. And, I'm very happy with what we ended up with. Like, I think that it did turn out well, but the process is, as you imagine, like very frustrating. And I think the thing that sales can't necessarily see as not necessarily like a visual body is kind of to look forward into not just what is popular before, but what is popular is going to be popular. And it's always because somebody does something phenomenal. There are some really phenomenal cover designers who are just doing, they manage to get something through that is exciting and new, and then that sparks a whole movement. I think like the last note on that is, I think everybody will probably notice now that illustrated YA covers are very popular. Especially like YA queer romances, it's like entirely that. That change happened almost entirely over the 2 periods I was at Macmillan. When I started, it was known throughout the design team that illustrated covers were middle grade books. You could not sell a YA illustrated book because people would think that the art made it too young. And then you had covers like, I'm going a little off topic or like off schedule because I think I might bring this up later, but like Nina LaCour's We Are Okay, which is designed by Samira Iravani and illustrated by Adams Caravallo. And this book was suddenly, every single book we did was comping to this book. Like, this was the book all of our books wanted to look like. And all of a sudden that became something that we could do. We had the permission to use an illustrator for YA books. And now, as you can see, like that was trickling in, and now it's just like YA is illustrated, and nobody thinks twice about it. So I think that's kind of an example of like how, despite like the fact that there is very specific genre conventions, those genre conventions are also always changing and evolving. And that evolution comes from designers and illustrators inside the industry who are often pushing back against some of the more kind of conventional tropes.
So Sloan, as an independent and an artist and a cartoonist, like how much of attention are you paying to what's going on at this level when you're working on your own covers? And what do you see? I mean, if you're pushing a little from the outside, how do you see yourself kind of either working with or challenging these genre conventions when it comes to covers?
I feel like I pay attention just because I actually enjoy graphic design. And I also just read a lot of books, and I like to keep abreast of stuff. So I like seeing the flux of like trends. But I actually don't really consider the audience or trends a lot when I'm working on my own book covers, because I don't know what, like Amy and Grace are saying, like once a trend is like established, like these illustrated young adult book covers, then it just becomes another sea of that. And then you kind of sink into the expectations that kind of cover brings. So I'm just like not super concerned with that. I'd rather follow whatever. To me, the cover is like the first introduction of the story or the art to the reader. And so that's not, to me, even though it's like not a great marketing thing, to me, I want to treat it as a work of art and the first like part of a story, rather than like kind of like telegraphing like genre and, other sort of expectations, which is like, my publishers don't like that. I like with Prism Soccer, I had this really cool logo that I got to use for a little bit, but it was a little too well, I'll just show it. It's like a little convoluted. See how the text is like in, you know, it's like people were like confused. They didn't even see the word stalker, even though it's in beautiful, shiny holographic lettering. But I just thought it was cool because to me, it was translating that there's this like interweaving and like almost like confusion happening in the story, which is follows with like the themes of the comic, but not great for marketing. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting because you are the author also and the illustrator. So when does the author come into this process for you all? Clearly, like Sloan, you're in it from go. Others, John, how as you also it sounds like you've been in both places potentially as both the author and the publisher. Where does the author come into the expectations of the cover? And how do you convey to them when the cover they dream of is not the one that you want or we're going to work for marketing?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, so for the more independent work, because I still do a lot of work with indies as well, then they have a lot of say, what I'm saying? We have a lot of say as far as like what they feel the cover should be and, respectful of each other's like boundaries and assets and expertise, I found that the more powerful the author, the more say they have. For instance, working with Octavia Butler's estate agent in her estate, everything had to be approved, everything, so as if they didn't like it, it wasn't gonna get done, and even the book itself, if we did like test pages and they didn't dig it, then it wasn't not gonna happen, so it was like that's how that went. So for the rest of the stuff that we've done with Abrams or that I've been overseeing there, there's not a lot of input, at that particular point. I think that what happens is the authors are working on the books and, sometimes for this one book that we did called The Eightfold Path, I think that the book was already up for pre-sale before the authors actually saw the cover. So it was like, it was like that fast. And they're like, oh, that looks good. It's like, I'm glad you like it. It sounds like, so I think it depends. It depends on the client and, what aspect of design we're looking at. But if it's more independent, then I think you're treating the author more like a client, you know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Amy, what's the experience in your range of publishing?
Very similar. The more powerful the client is, or the author is, how much the publisher cares about making sure that they are happy, the more input that they have. There are books that I've done where, like, I don't know if the author has seen it until after it was approved. There are books where, the author is, I haven't worked on any, I don't think, where I've been in touch the whole time, but there have been colleagues of mine who have had that situation. I think it can kind of cut both ways. I think that lots of the time people come into, and this is like, I totally understand this from a perspective of like, you've just spent so long creating something and this is how it's going to be shown to the world, and like you have an idea of how that should look, but I think that oftentimes, again, like if they're not necessarily a visual person, or there's sales has a different idea, or even just like the designer and the art director and the editor have like a very specific idea that they think has worked better, I think that it's one of those things where I think it's best for everyone to go into it with like an open mind. And I think this includes the designer. Like I said about that book where I did like 75 different covers, like, trust me, I was mad. I was mad the whole time. It was frustrating. And it's like, being a designer, you learn to basically create something, show it to someone, and they're like, that's bad, next one. And you just do that over and over and over again. I'm sure everybody, illustrators, same thing. I'm sure you have that same kind of feeling. And you get very good at kind of being like, okay, I will take your feedback and we'll figure out like what works for everyone. And I think that if everybody, designer, editor, marketer, author, all kind of come into it with an open mind, I think that the process of collaboration tends to be less painful. So I guess that's like twofold, is like lots of the time the author doesn't see it, but if they do see it, I think that like my message as a designer talking to like writers is that I think that like design is also an art, and it's one of those things where I think the more it's treated as a collaboration, I think the better the output is.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Of course.
Is that okay? I was just like,
yeah, please.
Yeah, I definitely vibe with what Amy was saying, because it's like, I feel like a lot of artists and authors, like they want to have a cover that's going to perfectly like represent the story and all its facets and complexities. And it's really not going to happen with just one image, unless you're doing like some sort of insane, like hyper detailed illustration of some sort. But even then, like it's not going to happen, you know? So having that openness is like, so yeah, super important.
Just to like also interrupt, but to respond to Sloan, I think when you were saying that your publishers don't like you because you want to do the right cover, I think that you'd be surprised at how often designers that you're working with and will actually really love that. Like as a designer, like I am not always in a position to push something. And I think that especially like I do a lot of working with illustrators. I've done both. I've done like stock art photo covers, and I love working with illustrators because I am a trained illustrator, and I always try and hire somebody to do what they are good at. And I think that comics are a very specific intersection where the artist does have the power to play the author in the hierarchy of who's allowed to say what. And I think that, I don't know, I personally am always like, when an artist has a vision and like there is pushback, I think that it's, I don't know, I guess this is completely refuting what I just said. It's like collaboration, but also fight me. But like there are times when you can't always, like somebody on the team is not in the position to say what they really feel about something. And I think that like making sure that everybody, you know, if you feel passionate about something, you can hear it. I don't know. I guess that's a part of collaboration too, is you want to hear what people really think.
Great. Do you have any other tips for authors or your experience?
So in my experience, generally I should work with an art director. I've rarely worked directly with an author unless they're asking me to do promotional material for them specifically. So if I am doing something for like a publication, it'll basically be through the AD. I basically never meet the author ever. I just receive the story or a summary and then go from there. And they make the decisions about like, they take what I've done, bring it back to the team, and then feedback gets collected for me via them. Or they just use it right away. So basically, from my standpoint, because of all of those gateways of communication, I have to be very strong in terms of iteration and flexibility. So you learn how to not turn in like a fully rendered painting and be like, this is it. This is perfect already. No, what you're going to do is you're going to hand in like 3 to 5 sketches and kind of get a sense of what's going to work for your client. So these are things that you've knocked out in like an hour or so each. And this is a way to kind of convert verbal speech to visual speech. So if they're like, we think the character is the most important part of this, this book's experience, are you going to show the character? Are you going to show the character facing forward so that audiences can identify with who this character, like what kind of person this character is? Or is this character going to be facing backwards so that they can self-project themselves onto this character's experience? And you give them all these iterations to basically make it a little easier to talk with them. Because it's very hard to get somebody who isn't visual to say, yes, I want the character turned around because it represents the fact that this story is about being outcast. But you as an illustrator know how to do that. Also, I ask my ADs for a lot of trust. My portfolio is out there for you to see, like, you know what my style is. I'm going to assume that you are hiring me for a project that something that I have drawn before would look good on this book. That like I have a lot of fantasy work. If you put me on a YA contemporary about 2 kids in Ohio, which is a place I've never lived, it might not turn out so well. So you have to put a lot of trust in your art director, and the art director puts a lot of trust in the illustrator.
So this brings me to my favorite portion of the event. Some of you have all pre-selected some covers that are some of your favorites. And so if we can go through those, and I'd love to hear, we're going to show them to our viewers. And I would love to have you highlight pretty quickly what makes this a great cover for you, or your favorite, or a cover that you believe would sell books. Can we start with Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, I had pulled We Are Okay, which is designed by Samira Iravani, who's a phenomenal art director. I think one of the reasons that I wanted to show this is partially because this is like empirically, this is acknowledged across the board as a wonderful cover that kind of kicked off a different turn in YA covers. I think there's a lot of stuff about it that's great. I think the kind of limited color palette, the strong lines, the title being like that white, and then having the kind of like the dots of the snow like pulling from that is just really lovely. But also I think that it is just something about it was so new and exciting at the time. And it also continues to hold up. So I think that's one of the reasons that I pulled that one.
Thank you. Grace, would you talk us through yours? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Cool. So if you could pull up Red Queen. All right. So Red Queen came out. It's a YA novel, a YA fantasy. And so one of the things about this cover is I really like the way that it captures mood, which is essentially what you're trying to sell whenever you create an image. You can't sell any specific moments in the book, especially not at the end of the book, because that's literally a spoiler. What you're trying to convey to an audience is the type of experience that they're going to get. How is this going to make them feel? And Red Queen, even though it's a high fantasy, wants to convey that it's different from other high fantasies. So it doesn't leverage a very obvious, princess on the cover. Instead, it does it very subtly. A similar thing happened with Twilight originally, with like the two hands and the apple. It wasn't kind of like that romance novel vampire cover. And Red Queen does a really good job of subtly capturing the theme of blood and overthrow by just having a crown turned upside down. So it's a very good example of visual metaphor, which is kind of how do you take what this story is about and create one really standout image that people can remember. Because remembering things is probably the most important part of cover design.
Thank you. Sloan, I'd love to see your cover and tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Maybe we can pull up Godshot first, which I don't know anything about because it's pretty new, but it was really striking to me. And so I grabbed that one. And yeah, one thing I also want to say about covers is like, how do we view covers nowadays? It's not usually at a bookstore. It's as a tiny thumbnail on Goodreads or Amazon or on Twitter. So I actually feel like, I don't know, covers, I feel like the more powerful marketing tool is word of mouth. If my friends recommend something or a reviewer that I like that have similar tastes, like that's who I'm going to. But it's also very difficult for me to like we were talking about fantasy trends, like Red Queen. I feel like I've seen that style of cover a lot because that's the popular way to present that sort of genre. Maybe it's like dark fantasy. So it's interesting. I don't know. It's very hard to stand out in the cover world. But I really like Gotcha. I actually don't think it tells you a lot about the story. Maybe there's gold glitter in the story. Maybe it's set in contemporary times. I'm not sure. I just find the cover itself very striking and inviting. Another one that I feel like is a classic is the Garth Sabriel cover by, I believe it's Gregory Rogers. I feel like most people will know that one. And it's just this beautiful character illustration of the main character. And it's doing so much work just with the clothing design, like the little patterns of like keys on her like tunic. You have the bells on her chest. Like this is doing incredible work. You have like the monster in the background. Is it Mog or something? I can't remember. Anyway, that one is really striking to me. And I actually wish more people would do these really highly intricate kind of like traditional illustrations for like covers, kind of like a Leo and Diane Dillon. If you don't know them, they did like super prolific artist duo. They're incredible. They're like some of my favorite cover artists ever. They've done a lot of big notable covers for books. And then maybe we can show the Drifting Classroom cover too. That'll be my last one, by Kazuo Mez. This is like one of my favorite comics, and I really love this cover. You kind of have the text. The text is doing so much work. It's kind of like doing this like VHS tracking, glitching from the bottom, going through the bottom to the top, which kind of gives it this like 80s vibe, I guess. And this is very like 80s, 70s, like horror with like little kids, like a whole school basically gets transported to another hellish dimension, and all these kindergartners are like trying to survive. And you can kind of get that from the cover, but I just think it's really creepy. There's also this element of like dark red. It's not like this super vibrant red, and the black that's doing a lot of work that kind of makes you like strain to see what's happening in the image. And yeah, that's what I think is also a big thing for good covers, is covers that invite you to continue looking at it and not just make like one big, kind of like flash in the pan impression. And then you're like, okay, yeah, I've seen that. Like ones that like invite you to return and look at it again and again. I think that's what makes a good cover.
I'm so glad you mentioned the Dillons. I just love those covers. The People Could Fly is one of my favorite covers ever. And every time I see that in a bookstore, I stop and gasp a little bit. John, your turn. Let's see some of our cover or covers.
Yeah, so I think I might have totally misunderstood the assignment, because I picked books that I've done covers for, or do we? Yeah, so
that works. Tell us something about a book that you've got that you're proud of.
I do like the Black of the Ink, actually, Constructions of Black Identity in Comics and Sequential Art. It's an academic book because of the long subtitle, first of all, which is small, right? So it's a book that I co-edited with Francis Gateward for Rutgers University Press. And I first of all, I was like, if I'm going to work on this book, it took us like years to edit, because, we had to switch presses, both of us moved jobs. And so whatever we ended up, I was like, I need to do this design for this book, because we worked really hard on editing the book, right? And so I don't know if you have followed any of the innovations in, say, like studying comics in, the academy, but for a long time, they were not considered to be, worthy of study, right? And then, of course, what happens is like, oh, comics are literature, right? And so you have all these covers that have like bam, boom, pow, and all these like, bright colors and panel structures, and, just like the tropes of comics, like the different things that people think about when you see comics. So I wanted to do a cover that was, that kind of went against those conventions, And this is actually specifically about Black identity in comics, right? So the first thing was like, well, we kept the idea of the speech bubble, because, the speech bubble is actually one of the tropes of comics. But then also we had I was trying to figure out ways to get across comics without using the same types of idioms, right? So one of the things I looked at doing was to do a Rorschach test, which was, a way to like talk about identity, right? As Grace was talking about metaphor, right? And so I did this Rorschach test, scanned it in, and then started to figure out what it reminded me of. And so I actually created this face that's based off of Icon, from Milestone Media. It's a pretty prominent like Black comic book company that DC was putting out back in the 90s, and now it's kind of resurfaced. And and it started like thinking about what this face could look like, because a lot of it was about like, darks and lights and like trying to activate the space properly, and then create a cover that's very different than what a university press would do. Because a lot of times they're very straightforward. There's not a lot of thought being put into like putting out, catching the eye, so to speak. and I wanted to kind of push back against some of the conventions that happen in that particular arena. Let's see. Do we have time to talk about another one, or did we?
We can do one more.
Okay, cool. Then bring up Mothership. Again, this is a piece where I did this design in like a day. I actually did illustration work for it, and also this is for the the jacket, right? So this is a hardcover book with the jacket on it, and so the idea was to get across Afrofuturism, and so basically the idea was to show the past and the present and the future happening simultaneously, and so I kept trying to create this. This idea of from this book this short story called Ark of Bones. And so I tried to create this vessel that was made out of bones, that kind of thing, right? And also kind of get across the organic nature of, Black speculative culture, but also kind of like the science and the mystical aspects, that kind of thing. And so that's what I was trying to do with that particular cover. This was for Rosarium Press. It's a Black-owned, small, independent press that specifically publishes work around like people of color and speculation. So that's my spiel, and thank you for letting me share my work. So.
Love it. We actually interviewed Bill with Rosarium, was it this last spring, and a part of the Afrofuturism series. So that was a great conversation. So you all are very accomplished artists, illustrators, designers, publishers. How has your approach to design or art for covers changed over time? And what's some piece of advice you would give yourself starting out in the Wayback Machine? What would you tell yourself about this process? The hot seat. John, you ready? You look like you're up.
Yeah, because again, I would say, basically do the same thing that Amy did with those covers, like provide a lot of different instances, and then narrow them down. She was put in a space where, they were put in a space where the client had, was pushing back a lot. But I think like learn how to kill your darling, so to speak, and actually think about like the objectivity of, yes, it's an art, but also, there's a commercial aspect to it, and there are audiences that you have to speak to, and then also do your research, like try to get to understand as much as you can about the story, and provide like a lot of different iterations, that kind of thing. And don't get too attached. Don't get too attached to the covers, because I think that used to happen to me quite a bit. Like I fired some clients because I was like, well, if you don't understand my vision, then the hell with you. Sorry. So, but no, I don't do that anymore. So.
Sloan, how about you? What would you tell past Sloan? What have you learned, and how's your approach changed?
So I think if you're making your own work, one thing I started out, I was kind of worried about marketing myself. So I felt like I had more of a marketing brain, but I wish I would have just stuck to my guns and treated the cover as just, the first part of my art, and made it more like a poem and something that lights up your like aesthetic senses, rather than worrying about like, making it like an ad basically. And then like when I'm working with clients, something that I do now is I make sure that they understand my aesthetic. So I do book covers freelance. So people will contact me, and usually that means that they've looked at my portfolio, they know what kind of art I do and like my aesthetics, and then that makes it easier because they're like, usually whatever I do, they're usually happy with. And I'm not trying, not that I'm not trying to please them, but they're not going to ask me to do a cover that's totally out of my wheelhouse, basically. But a couple of years ago, I was like, yeah, I'll do like whatever. And I was more actively looking for that type of work and trying to do things that just weren't, they weren't super compatible with my style and sensibilities. So yeah, kind of sticking to what you like to do aesthetically will make obviously your work a lot easier.
Grace?
Things that like I would, for my position, it's kind of like learn everything and learn what you're not good at. Like basically, especially when you're first starting out, you want to be everything to everyone. You want to be like the best fantasy illustrator, the best sci-fi illustrator, but you also want to draw anime, but you also want to like draw your favorite fandom characters, and you want to participate in everything. And basically, sometimes when you try to do everything yourself, you end up just doing everything not great. So you have to so when you try everything, you realize what your strengths and your weaknesses are. For example, I only do typography if literally I can get no help. It is something that is always going to be my weakness. But painting and rendering and just composition are things that I am stronger at. And so those are things where it's I can even draw a sketch and somebody else can finish it, or I can help in an iteration process doing concept work for designing what does a character look like, because I'm good at that visual translation, metaphor kind of thing. But I am totally just reliant on other people when it comes to putting any words on anything.
And Amy.
A lot of the stuff that I think about has already been talked about. But kind of an amalgam of that is, yeah, you have to know when to let things go. And being a very stubborn person, the flip side of that, to put it in a way that is more palatable to me, is you need to know when to let things go so that you can know when to fight for things as well. So if you don't pick fights until you're 100% sure this is a hill you want to die on, people are much more likely to listen to you. And that's something I always kind of tell myself. I think the other thing is Grace and Sloan have been talking about this from the perspective of an illustrator. I think that it is extremely important part of your job as an art director to be kind of buffer between your illustrator and just the rest of the publishing process. I think that kind of at the beginning, you have to know when an illustrator is right for a project so that you don't end up dragging somebody else into something where, Grace was saying, or Sloan was saying, they don't want what you do. The worst thing I think you can do as an art director is try and art direct somebody out of their own style. You can't do that, and it's always going to end up badly. So at the beginning stages of when you're picking an illustrator, even if I really love somebody's work and I'm we have to do this, it's the best, it's going to be so good, and they're no, we can't do this. I think you have to learn when to let that go so that you don't end up making things significantly worse for everybody. I think that, when you're working with an illustrator, you want everybody to be on the same page so that when you are conveying information to that illustrator, they're getting just what they need, and then they'll be able to turn back what you're looking for. So I think, yeah, it really does come down to knowing when to make, what choices are the right choices, and to really learn to trust yourself. And I don't know if I could tell my younger self that. I think you have to get there. I think you really do have to do it over and over again. But I do think, maybe if I could pat my younger self on the shoulder and be you can let it go. It's okay. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, this is tangential, but I would like to bring up that most illustrators are work for hire contractors. So they're not going to be receiving the same benefits or they won't have health insurance from the company that is contracting them. So having the efficiency of the communication being done via a single person, via an art director, that gives them more time for drawing and helps them deliver a better, concise product, because part of the art director's role is to consolidate the feedback of the team and provide the direction for the illustrator themselves. So a great AD is worth their weight in gold. Oh my God.
Grace, I'm really glad you said that about the being work for hire. I think designers and art directors are often getting lots of pressure regarding paying a certain amount or having certain contract terms. And sometimes you can't fight on that. But the one thing you can always fight on is you're going to make this as easy as possible for the person you're working with. And I think that is, we've been talking a lot about design, and I think most designers are also art directors these days. And that is that is what you want. You want to make sure that if you're working with other people on a book cover, everybody's on the same page, and you have to acknowledge that we're paying you for your art. We're not paying you for dealing with the editor and the marketing person, like I get paid to do that. I don't always like it, but like I get paid to do that. So that's a part of the job too.
Well, as we wind down, I want to hit some questions from our viewer audience folks for you all. And one, I love this question. This is if you could design or illustrate a cover for a dream book, your dream gig, what would it be? And I won't put anybody in a hot seat. So whoever's ready, just head in first if you know what your dream gig is.
I realized Sloan just said this, but Abhorsen and Sabriel, just flat out.
So much good imagery in those books. I probably do one of my favorite series is the Xenogenesis series. So I would love to draw some like human alien hybrids, and that already has a lot of good like pulpy covers, but I would love to do my own take on it.
I was in the same vein. I would like to. My dream book would be Parable of the Trickster, which was the third book that never got finished by Octavia Butler because she passed away. So I would love for her to be around to see how her work is still affecting everyone. So that would be my dream book.
I think as somebody who's always worked in genres that aren't necessarily like the closest genre to my heart, I think I would really love to do a sci-fi cover someday. One that comes directly to mind is Vandermeer. I'd love to do a Vandermeer cover. Yeah, I'd love to do some kind of cool sci-fi or even fantasy covers. The reason I got into cover design was because I always wanted to do those cool dragon cover books, and I realized I couldn't draw. Like, Grace, like, you can do that. Like, I can't. Like dragon painterly.
I can't draw dragons.
You can't? Okay, never mind. Sorry. But like, I'm not like a painterly dragon drawer. And I was like, wait, you could hire somebody to draw the painterly dragons but still be involved. So that's like, I guess, yeah. Someday I should do a cover with a book with a dragon on it. There we go.
Another from our audience is, what advice do you have for indie authors looking to find a cover artist or illustrator?
Don't use Fiverr. Don't use these cheap ripoff work. Those are just extremely terrible. And I know indie authors are hard up for money, and you want something really nice, but please don't use those. They're so bad. You're just making these people work for pennies, and yeah, please don't use those websites.
I think it's going to cost money. It's like one of those things where it's, especially illustration and design, like the amount of time that goes into that kind of stuff is a lot of time, and the expertise. And it's like, you can really tell, every once in a while you'll get lucky, and, someone will be unexperienced and willing to work for less, and but you don't want to count on that because it is unfair to them and to you. And I think that not sitting here as a designer, you should hire me specifically and you should also pay me lots of money. But I think that it's one of those things where it costs money. It's expertise. Art is very, very valuable expertise that a lot of people don't have. And I think it's something that you want to make sure that when you're hiring somebody, you're respectful of that, because that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, just numbers wise, again, remember how I said a lot of us don't have health insurance? There's a reason I live in Canada. So for example, for me and probably other illustrators similar tiers, it's roughly 20 to 40 hours to complete a piece. So just take that number and do the math of living costs, hourly pay. And that is a much more reasonable amount to go off of than just be well, this is how much cash I have to spare. Maybe let's see what I can get from that. Another thing is that I recommend for authors is to kind of learn how to write an art brief, essentially. So basically, don't send the author, don't send your artist your entire novel, because again, the price that they quoted you is likely not going to count the time that they had to spend reading it. And again, health insurance. So what you're trying to do is distill out, what do I want to say about my own book? Like, what kind of mood am I going for? Do I have something really specific I want to show? Like for John, like he's like, I need to show that this is about people of color. I'm going to put comic language on here. That's kind of super valuable information. But an artist doesn't necessarily need to know how your character grew up, like in their childhood, if the whole book is about their whole like emotional transformation when they're like 65. So try to give them a good summary of the emotion of your book and any mandatory visuals that you absolutely need to see that you think represent your book really well.
I don't have really anything to add. That was all, those are great. All those things are wonderful. I guess for me, I would say like the clients, I feel like I have to teach a lot of clients how to be good design clients, you know? So I guess my whole thing is be open to learning from the process, I guess, you know, that kind of thing. But no, everybody's answer is like just, yes, stupendous. Yeah.
And also like just for finding artists, like I mostly get my work from Twitter. So maybe if you're on Twitter and you're comfortable there, it's like there's tons of hashtags where artists are posting their work. There's portfolio day, hashtag portfolio day. There's hashtag drawing while Black, hashtag like drawing while Indigenous, like one for each little like ethnic niche. There's like visible women. That's a huge hashtag. And you can just go through and scroll through just like infinite amounts of illustrators.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is I've had authors come up to me and ask like, oh, I want to message this such and such artist, but I don't know, you know, if they like how to reach them or whatnot. It's literally go to their website and like find their email. Like that's because, as I said, a lot of us are independent contractors. It's literally whatever is on the website, and they culturally we're used to just getting like cold call emails from potential clients. And so like, that's perfectly fine. There's no like, I need to find an art director or whatnot. Just email directly. It's good. Don't be scared.
If you are looking for like a designer instead of an illustrator, which is also an option, I mean, you could hire a designer who could then hire an illustrator, but the money goes up. But this is kind of like, this is advice that I would love to be able to give without caveat, is if you find books that you like, that you think look like the book, like what you want your dream book to look like, you can go find who designed that book. A lot of people who work full-time also take freelance work. Like I take freelance work. Most of my colleagues take freelance work. You can always, well, look up who did a cover. The caveat to that is lots of the time, no one will tell you who made the cover. It is not often published in book cover reveals. Half the time the artist isn't credited in like tweets with book cover reveals. Oftentimes the designer isn't mentioned. So the flip side to that is if you see a beautiful cover you like on Twitter or whatever, and whether you're interested in hiring that person or not, it's always brightens my day to see somebody go, hey, who designed this? Just so that then those people can also get work. Same with illustrators. If an beautiful illustration is being passed around, but there's no name attached to it, that person isn't benefiting. So it's always good to, if you see something beautiful, you can bookmark it for a future, and you can also be like, then you build up a database of people who you like, so that when you do have to hire somebody, you're like, oh, here's my list of people who I've seen their things and like them.
One place I found that information is like, you know, if you actually have a physical copy of the book, it's on that page with all of like the copyright information. Is usually they'll probably list the designer and illustrator there if you need to actually like look it up.
Yeah, usually they do. I think sometimes you'll have luck getting the copyright page through like Amazon look insides. That's but the other thing to do is you can just Google like book cover, and occasionally they will pop up, or somebody's like design website will have it, or like book designer, book art director, but it's still kind of a crapshoot.
Okay, Indies. So here you go. Learn an artist brief, learn how to write one and give one to your artist, and credit your cover designer or your illustrator when you release your cover so that others can find them. Be a good part of the ecosystem of providing these awesome illustrators and designers with good work to do. Keep them working. I want to thank you all for being here. I have one final question for you, and that is if you can tell us, what are you working on now and where we can find you? Grace, why don't you kick us off?
Wait, you say me?
Yes, you, Grace.
Okay, so I just finished up handing in a short comic to Neon Hemlock for the anthology Unfettered Hexes. So I'll be able to see that soon. And right now I'm on break playing Nier Automata, but you can find me on my website, gracepfong.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Fictograph.
Sloan, what are you working on and where can we find you?
I'm working on the next volume of Prism Stalker, which should be out summer next year. And I'm also working on a Kickstarter that's going to launch August 1st. And it's going to be an illustrated horror anthology. So yeah, you can follow me and keep tabs on that. My Twitter handle is Sloan, and my website is also sloansloan.com.
Thanks, Sloan. Amy, what are you working on? Where can we find you?
So I am working along at my day job, doing a lot of really wide-ranging nonfiction. Some stuff I'm excited about is we just did a workbook for kids dealing with anxiety, which I think is really good, and the illustrator did a super cute job. There's a hedgehog involved. Did a book about witchcraft. You know, we're just like doing a children's Bible. There's like, we're a little all over the place, but it's fun to kind of touch so many things. And you can find me at my website, amyfleck.com, or on Twitter at same Amy Fleck, Instagram, Amy Fleck. Same everywhere.
You had me at hedgehog. John, would you please close us down? Let us know what you're working on next and where we can find you.
Okay. So I'm working on the next Octavia Butler adaptation. We're doing Parable of the Talents. I'm in the middle of doing character designs for that. Script is wonderful by Damian Duffy. Editing a bunch of graphic novels by and about people of color from Abrams Megascope through Abrams Comics Arts. And I'm also working on a short comic for this upcoming Afrofuturist show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which is really exciting too. And I'm also working on raising this kid because he's like 2 and running around. It's like a hurricane with knees. It's crazy up in here. Anyway, so, and you can find me at J.I. Jennings. That is my Twitter handle, and John Jennings Art on Instagram, and John Jennings Studio is my site. So
thank you, and good luck with that project. I'm 6 years in, and I don't know that it's ever going to end. It's never going to end. So, yeah. So on behalf of Clarion West and the Write-A-thon, I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm really grateful that we get the opportunity to share all of this information with our writers who are writing happily away for the Write-A-thon. And I thank all of you who are watching for joining us tonight. Please like, share, and subscribe for this video. And for more things, for more information on the Write-A-thon, check the links in the comments. We have 3 more weeks of programs, workshops, and community, so it's not too late to register and join us. And do join us again on the 19th of July for the final panel in our series. That one will be on mental health and writing. It's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Thanks again, and time zone appropriate farewell.